Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I'm going to be covering some major bust candidates for the 2021 fantasy football season. I've got somewhat of an all-bust team lined up today where I've got every major fantasy position filled out in a starting lineup of bust candidates, players I think that are incredibly risky, are due for some major drawback, regression from the 2020 season, and all that stuff factored into one big assessment of them becoming a potential bust candidate for this year. And then after that starting lineup of bust players, if you will, I've got a second string lineup as well of players that I think may be incredibly risky or will not live up to expectations. So with that being said, drop down, give today's video a like before we get started. If you've got any questions for me, I'd be happy to get to you throughout the video. Whenever you've got them, just drop them down and I'll answer them as quickly as possible. Subscribe if you're new around here. And with that being said, let's hit that intro and get right into the episode. Alrighty, here we go. So kicking off the bust lineup, actually one quick note I want to get into before we start off today is in the 2021 draft guide collection here at the SFS channel, I've got an entire sleeper and bust master list on top of all of the other information that we've got packed into that draft guide. It's the best value on the fantasy market for the 2021 season. And on there, you can simply head over to the drop-down tab for the 2021 draft guide, click on bust candidates, and then you can check that out. I've got them sorted into positions. So you can click on the quarterbacks tab. It'll bring you to a master list of all of the players at the quarterback position I see as bust candidates for this year. You can click on their player banners, which is what will be displayed for you to inform you who is and who is not a bust. And by just simply clicking on their player banner, it'll take you straight to their in-depth player profile where you can check out and read in-depth information about my forecast for their fantasy season this year. So with that being said, Jalen Hurts is the top candidate I've got here at the QB position to be a bust. Look, there is two very different sides to this equation. I think Jalen Hurts is a boom or bust play this season. You could easily classify him as a sleeper as well. His ADP has him going roughly between the QB 12 and 13 draft positions, and I totally get the other side of the argument, and I've argued it at times, but I also have to acknowledge the significant risk that we've got here in Philadelphia as well that plays into him being a potential bust. I love the fact that he's got Devontae Smith, a true wide receiver one who he can throw the ball to this year. I love that he's got a few running backs behind him now to hand the ball off to help balance out this offense. Jalen Reagor, being another wide receiver from the 2020 draft, can hopefully come out here and improve the ceiling of this offense. Dallas Goedert's a nice piece. But Jalen Hurts as a pure passer wasn't all that accurate or efficient last season. His legs give him some more upside and stability in his fantasy outlook. But at the end of the day, what hurt Carson Wentz the most last season prior to Hurts being introduced to this offense? It was injuries to nearly every position around him. We've already seen Devontae Smith catch the injury bug and sprain his knee. The Eagles seemingly always have a trashed and battered offensive line by like week 4. If Hurts has to be running around for his life, it's not fair of us to expect him to accurately pass the ball downfield, efficiently get the ball into his players' hands, and ask him to do things that elite NFL quarterbacks would do. There's a reason he wasn't a first-round pick. He was a second-round pick and supposed to be just a top backup in the case that Carson Wentz would not be available because of his past injury history. It just so happens that his play was so poor, Hurts ended up getting elevated into the lineup, and now we've got a situation here where he is a team starting quarterback, and he has the chance to fulfill that role this season. So he very much has to prove himself as much as he does have the chance and shown flashes last year of why he can be a great fantasy quarterback. It's going to go one way or another. I don't see Jalen Hurts finishing as a low-end QB1 this year. I think he's either right in the mix amongst the best at the position, or he's going to be kind of a middle to low-end QB2. There's just a lot of, it's high risk, high reward. You're rolling the dice here and playing your chances. Some people will be incredibly comfortable putting Jalen Hurts out there as their QB1 this season, and some people will take the side of caution here. And again, I have been an advocate for his ceiling as well, so I want to make sure that doesn't go unnoticed here, but I do think there is too much risk to not acknowledge him as a bust candidate for this season. Joe Mixon. How many times have we crashed and burned on this one? I forget the exact stat off the top of my head, and I tried to find it before today's video, but I couldn't quite place my finger back on it. He has, I believe, the most RB3 finishes or worse of any player going as early as him on the draft board. He just tends to be a bit of an inconsistent play, and that's not something that or consistency isn't something we've been able to see from him to this point in his career. And Joe is on his second contract now, so he's not exactly a young gun who's trying to find his way in the league. He's a vet. He is a player who has a 3-down work set and potential to produce as a workhorse running back. Last year when he was on the field, he had some of the best volume numbers of any running back in the league. But I don't trust the offensive line still. It got a little better, but not enough for me to think, wow, that team is really going to move defenders out of the way for Mixon to get the job done. His offense has a timid quarterback. Right now, Joe Mixon has to play with Joe Burrow, who has openly acknowledged that he is a little bit gun-shy and a bit hesitant and cautious because of that ugly knee injury he had last year. So there's a few things I don't love too much here. This is also an extremely pass-happy team that just added a top 5 pick at the wide receiver position on top of the names they had last year. I think that really quickly this offense could become imbalanced, become a bit of a mess. I don't know. I think for an early second-round running back, you'll catch me going Antonio Gibson's way, calling his number, Najee Harris, taking advantage of other players that I think have similar upside, because, again, I will acknowledge Mixon has upside here, but that floor, not something I'm too excited about, and I would rather pass on if I have the chance. He's probably one of my least taken players in the second round on mock drafts here on the channel, so something to keep in mind here and at least just be aware of heading into your draft day. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't think I have actually picked once in a mock draft on the channel this season. Some people are super bullish on CEH. I've seen people comment on my videos. Clyde, I think, will finish as a top 5 rusher this season. I'm sorry. I just don't see it. I don't envision a scenario where he just scores enough touchdowns to put himself in that category. Look at the other elite pass-catching volume players. Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, they're also scoring a crap load of touchdowns. You're talking 15-plus on a season. I think Kamara had 21 last year, and I want to say Cook was between 16 or 17. So there's no chance, if you ask me, that Clyde does that. He's not getting the goal line work that those two players are getting in the ground game. And I'm not going to sit back here and tell you that Clyde's going to score from 20 yards out on a passing down 15 times in a given season. He just doesn't have the stature, the body, the confidence in his coaching staff, or rather they don't have the confidence in him to be used as a short down yardage player. I don't know. There's too much. I feel uncomfortable assessing his upside because I think that when you look at the whole situation, put context behind his usage, his role here, even as a receiving threat, his numbers weren't that awesome last year. Pat Mahomes just isn't looking to check the ball down to a scat back out in the flat and look for him to find open space. It was awesome seeing what he did in week 1 against Houston on opening Thursday last year, but he never really saw those numbers again. His next best performance, I want to say, was against the Bills. He was very impressive in the Super Bowl. Maybe the Chiefs become a bit more of a balanced attack this season, but I still think that Darrell Williams is probably the ground and pound goal line hog this year, and Jerick McKinnon even might wiggle himself into some sort of work as a change of pace back. So the floor is just really ugly for me with CEH this season, and I don't like the upside either. I'm staying away. He's going in the second round of 12-team leagues. That's a big no thank you for me. Mike Evans, another name up on the board here. I would like to not have Mike Evans on this list, but his dependency of scoring touchdowns last year was a big red flag for me. I understand he was not healthy for parts of last season, but he was having games where he was literally only catching touchdown passes. Literally. I'm not saying that he was having 4 for 40 and a touchdown. He would have 1 catch for 1 yard and a touchdown. 2 catches, 2 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was incredibly strange to see how he was producing at times. And the thing that worries me a little bit extra this year is that as much as I project this Tampa Bay team for greatness this season, I worry about how that's going to impact the fantasy fourth quarter here in terms of Tom Brady's numbers, in terms of these receivers' pass catching production. They're not playing a division champ schedule. They're not playing first place teams. They didn't win the NFC South last year. They won the Super Bowl, but they didn't win the South. The Saints won the South last year. So Tampa is not playing the other first place teams in the NFC. Therefore, they have an easier schedule. They very well might whoop up on teams enough times this season that they are just not throwing the ball late in the fourth quarter. They can run the ball out with Rojo and playoff Lenny. They're not going to need to keep throwing the ball over the top. Bruce Arians is somewhat an aggressive head coach, so maybe they opt to do that, but it's a potential possibility. I'm just putting that out there, that could be something that in a crucial do-or-die game for you in your fantasy leagues this year, you need Mike Evans to catch you one more ball for 15 yards to seal up that game. He just might not get it for you. So he's got excellent ceiling potential. He could very well continue that touchdown success that he had last season, but he barely cracked 1,000 yards receiving. There's so many other targets in this offense that it's going to be very spread out. Antonio Brown was actually Tom Brady's most targeted player when he was out there on the field, when he was inserted into this lineup, and Chris Godwin had a higher target share percentage than Mike Evans did as well. So you're looking at, if you pace that out over a season, Mike Evans is the number 3 most targeted player on his own team. Yes, he might be the preferred option in the red zone, but Gronk and Brady, have you heard of those two? That's going to be somewhat of an issue as well. Julio Jones here, I debated. I've had my major concerns as a dynasty owner this year about A.J. Brown, and I contemplated him for this list. But I think the overall higher risk belongs to Julio Jones. I think that's also somewhat factored into his draft price, being he is the lower selected option in the top end of the fourth round. I think that going from an Atlanta offense where it was one of the most pass-happy teams in the league to a Tennessee, which is one of the most run-happy teams in the league, there's going to be a big culture shock here, a big adjustment for Julio Jones. We don't know. How many games is he really going to play this season? Because lingering issues have been a part of his fantasy profile for a couple of years now. We've had to factor that risk into the equation, and he's already missed some practice time as a Titan. So I'm not all that comfortable or confident saying that I think Julio will be out there for all the games this year, because I would bet that he's not going to be. As a matter of fact, A.J. Brown might not suit up for all these games. So he's going to be very boom-bust, similar to a Joe Mixon from the top of the board here, or even a Jalen Hurts type player. I think that it could really go one way or another, but I tend to lean it coming the other way, in him letting us down more often than he exceeds our expectations this season. Kyle Pitts. This one, I think Kyle Pitts is absolutely as advertised and will one day become a generational talent. But I don't think the time to do that is in his rookie season. We're drafting him right now in PPR leagues as the tight end 4. That is way too high for a rookie tight end. I understand that Noah Fant, this is my typical comparison here, he is the most comparable thing to what Kyle Pitts is in terms of an athletic pass-catching tight end that was picked at the top end of the first round just a couple years back. I understand he's still not on the level of Kyle Pitts or how he's regarded. But Noah Fant as a rookie was still a wild disappointment. Kyle Pitts, I see almost no way where he meets the expectations that we're putting on him for this season. How can we expect a rookie who has to transition into... You've heard all of the talk right now about Tim Tebow sucking as a blocker, and how hard. You hear it from Shannon Sharp, who is a Hall of Famer at the tight end position, talking about how tough it is to block the most athletic players on the other side of the field. You're talking 6'5" DNs that run just as fast as you do. Maybe not quite as fast in comparison to a Kyle Pitts, but he's not a blocking tight end. There's more to the tight end position than just catching passes, and this team will split him out wide, use him more as a Megatron-esque wide receiver in that facet of things. Yes, he will be much more a receiver than he is ever a blocker, but he's still going to have to learn how to do that. There's such an adjustment and a learning curve here to the tight end position. I don't see how it's going to be a seamless, fluid transition and immediately make himself a top-end fantasy tight end. We haven't seen anyone do that in the last number of years. It's so unusual and unlikely for a tight end to break out at such a young age. Kyle Pitts was 20 at the time of the NFL draft. The kid, he's just that. He's still a kid. So we have to give him chance and opportunity to develop first before we put these massive tight end 4 expectations on him. Even taking him on the low end of things is the tight end 6. So I'm Andrews and Hockenson over Pitts. I've been that way this whole offseason. I think that maybe as soon as year 2, Kyle Pitts can come out here and be a top 5 fantasy tight end. He will eventually probably be the tight end 1. And you've seen Travis Kelce, I think it's 5 years in a row now, he's been the tight end 1 in fantasy. Kyle Pitts will have a similar reign down the road at some point. But it's not his time to take over yet. Let's just give him some time. The risk is a bit more than people expect right now. I love Kyle Pitts. I'm a huge advocate again, huge fan of him. I think he'll be excellent, awesome one day. I'm just not as bullish on him in the 2021 season. Now, into the reserves, if you will. So Baker Mayfield is my second bust quarterback here. He finished as a middle-of-the-pack QB2 last season. The thing that gets me about Baker is I'm not hating on the Browns or doing anything like that here. They're just a run-first team. The passing volume isn't there. That's what it comes down to. And you don't see him tuck the ball and run it like you see Ryan Tannehill do. That's what kind of separates the two players. They can both be incredibly efficient. They both have excellent weapons to pass the ball to, but Tannehill just gives you a little bit more, whereas Baker's consistency was all over the place last season. He actually finished very poorly in the consistency ratings category from a season ago that we have on our draft guide. It's just a situation I don't love. And Odell Beckham Jr. is very streaky for this team. It's like all or nothing. It's back to the boom-bust argument. Baker is either all in or all out in a given week. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 games in a row that he had 14 points in fantasy. That's just not getting the job done. So he's not a starting level fantasy QB this season. He's not being drafted like he is one. But at the same time, there's players going after him that have far better upside, heck, even far better floors, in my opinion. So leave the Browns offense to the run game. Pick up and draft Chubb and Hunt all you want. But as far as Baker Mayfield goes and those wide receivers, I'm a little bit more skeptical and a bit cautious on those players. DAndre Swift. So this is where things get a little bit juicy again before we head on out today. DAndre Swift is 1,000% a bust candidate for the sole fact that this dude can't stay healthy. I love DAndre Swift. He's got an awesome tool set. One of the best backs as a pass catcher from the 2020 class. Out in space, he's electric, dynamic, elusive, and he's a thick little runner. So he can run players over, and he's tougher than people give him credit for. You'd think he'd go down at first contact. That's not him. DAndre Swift, though, literally has a laundry list put together already of things that have ailed him. Concussion, ankle, hamstring, groin. It just keeps happening. So as a young player who is supposed to be at his prime for the running back position, he is already showing us that at this ripe age of he can't be older than 22 or 23. He can't stay healthy. So that's the risk here. I mean, the Lions' offense is also expected to be terrible, not to mention that. But you just simply might not get games out of him. And he's a second-round pick, generously a third-round player if you can have him fall to you that far. I previously had him way back in January when I was projecting my top 12 running backs for upcoming season, literally 8 months ago now. I had him as my 12th or 11th or 12th overall back on the board. He's fallen closer to 20 than he is to 12 now. And I think that that's fair because the risk, the injury, I think he's an awesome player. Like I said, he could, if he stays healthy, be the second most targeted player in the passing game on this Lions team. There's just not enough consistent play of health on the field for me to see that makes me willing to draft him this season. And then Josh Jacobs, another classic here for me on the channel. Him and Clyde Edwards-Helaire have kind of been the players that I've really ganged up on this season. But it's not that I don't like them. I genuinely love just seeing NFL talent. I think these are both very good players. But in terms of fantasy production, they're just not the best scenarios for us. Josh Jacobs, I thought, could be a 3-down back, and I think he has the potential to be utilized that way. That's just not the way that Oakland uses him. Plain and simple. Kenyon Drake they brought in, I honestly couldn't tell you why they did that, but they didn't just bring in a veteran running back and pay him more than the veteran minimum to be a reserve Jalen Richard-esque player. No, he's going to come in. He's going to have a role. He will score touchdowns, take away from Josh Jacobs in that area of the production field. This offensive line got completely washed away, wiped off the face of the earth, reconstructed with a bunch of scraps and draft picks and all kinds of stuff. The situation has majorly changed. I think this Raiders offense took more of a step back this offseason than it did a step forward. They're going to need to see development from the young players in last year's draft class, plain and simple, to keep this thing relatively balanced and to keep defenses honest. Bryan Edwards, Henry Ruggs, I'm looking at those two players. They need to step up and make sure that teams can't just zone in on the run game, because if they do, they will become incredibly less efficient than they were last season, which already was not a good situation to be in. Josh Jacobs wasn't even averaging 4 yards per carry. So we need to see more from him. Touchdowns are going to be a vital piece of his fantasy scoring. I'm not saying that he's going to regress from his numbers last year, but he had 12 last season. A third of that came in week 1. That's not what you want to see either. So if that number comes backward, I can only imagine the disappointment he'll be leaving fantasy owners with this season. I would hope for him, he's going to probably need 15 or 16 to keep himself in the mix of being an RB1 this year. He's not being drafted as one anymore, but he's got to step it up somehow, either increase the yardage, the efficiency, the total output and production, or the touchdowns got to come up a lot. So too much risk here for me. I think the upside isn't there, and the floor is getting worse as well. Adam Thielen, I've talked about him as a bust candidate on the channel as well. Back to the Mike Evans argument, Adam Thielen was even more touchdown dependent. Justin Jefferson's also the clear-cut one in this offense. Now, when he's healthy, 1,400 yards in 14 games started. That's insane. That is crazy good production. He looks like a seasoned vet. He looked like he'd been in the league for 5-6 years as a rookie. I can't imagine what he's going to do in year 5 and 6. I mean, he reminds me of Devontae Adams as a Packer fan in terms of his seasoned route running, his elite ability to do that already. Sky's the limit for that kid. Thielen's getting older. He's not getting better. He's not going to see his output increase in this offense. Didn't crack 1,000 yards receiving last year. Again, 14 touchdowns in 15 games. There's a little bit of dependency I see there that I'm not a big fan of. And then the last name, actually, I've got one little added bonus here. I've got a defense to talk about. Kenny Golladay for the New York Giants. Nothing against Kenny G, but injuries have been an issue for him. Look at his last season with Detroit. He struggled there, and then it's either a groin or a hamstring that he's currently dealing with right now. And then on top of that, if things couldn't get worse, his quarterback play did as well. Daniel Jones, did anyone else see that clip of him throwing straight to the middle linebacker without a wide receiver or offensive target in the vicinity? I mean, I don't think Daniel Jones could hit the broadside of a barn if it was that or a defensive back 20 yards to the left. He's not an accurate passer. He's going to be the one thing that holds back this Giants team. Their roster is very, very, very well constructed. He might just be the thing that holds them back. And for a very avid Saquon Barkley drafter, and for someone that has a large amount of belief in him this season, I think not the offensive line, Daniel Jones, is the one thing that turnovers, insufficient play, that's the thing that could keep this team back. The turnovers, both interceptions and lost fumbles. He's going to have to figure out how to keep his hands on the ball, and he's going to have to figure out how to make safe and smart football IQ plays. So Kenny Golladay, he's got a chance to be a wide receiver 1 this year. I'm not going to put that out of the picture. The upside is still there, but I mean, it is a flashing red alarm. Signal the sirens here for the risk radar, 10 out of 10. Kenny Golladay is not someone I'm too excited about this season. And then I don't have an image or anything to put up on display for you guys for this last pick here. But in terms of a defense, if I had to pick a team that's being drafted as a top 5 defense right now, that I think, because these were all relatively early round players, outside of the quarterbacks, they were all fairly early picks on the board. talking first 5-6 rounds of 12-team leagues. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense is lacking one key component that I think might be a little bit of their fatal flaw here this season. So we've all seen Pittsburgh has playmakers. They have the opportunity, or not the opportunity, rather the capability of wildly quickly getting after the passer. TJ Watt, Cam Hayward. They just brought in Melvin Ingram from the Chargers, a former Pro Bowler. They've got some dudes up front. They can get after the passer. They lost Bud Dupree, but they're getting back Bush, the linebacker, who's crazy fast, can cover the whole field. The one thing, and typically if you've been around here on the channel, the one thing I say to look for in a fantasy defense is a team that can pressure the quarterback, because QB hits turn into knocked balls, inaccurate passes, which turn into picks. With that being said, the cornerback position looks incredibly vulnerable right now. Your best corner is Joe Hayden, who is a quality player. He's been a very good vet for the Steelers his whole tenure there. But he's 32. He's not getting younger. I'm not saying he can't still cover at this age. But after Joe Hayden, who, as I said, is already an older player, and as your cornerback one, I think you'd still rather have him as your number two. I haven't heard of any of those other guys. I know at one point literally was up on all of the teams, like first through third string players at every position. That Steelers locker room, I've seen very few of them at the cornerback position on any other team at any point in their careers. They lost some key players this offseason. They lost Steven Nelson, I believe. They lost, the slot corner who signed with the Bengals, Mike Hilton. Those were decent dudes that were at least capable of covering players. They're going to, at least, I'm not saying they can't, and I'm not saying that they will turn into a bust, but I think that this is just the most risky of the top-end defenses. I didn't want to toss out, like, oh, the Jets are a bust candidate at defense, because we already know they probably won't be that great this year. But that cornerback position group could turn into big plays, which could be very costly for us in fantasy. So essentially, if you play in the scoring format where what I like is leagues that you start your defense at 0, and when you get sacks, turnovers, touchdowns, your number just increases. But most standard scoring fantasy leagues are going to have you in formats where you start at like 10, and then you move backwards as you allow points. So in some leagues, even incorporate an element where yardage will hurt you as well. So I think the Steelers will get a lot of sacks this year. They'll probably lead the league in QB hits, but they might allow a lot of big plays as well. So it could be a very emotional roller coaster ride of a defense this season, but just stand and look out for that when you're drafting defenses early this season. Alrighty, there you have it. Those were some bust candidates, a lot of them, for the 2021 fantasy football season. Let me know down in the comment section below. Did you agree with a lot of the picks today? Or are there some names on here that you'd like to clear their name and kind of put some respect and positive light back on their fantasy situations? Because I can guarantee you, not everyone watching this video agrees with all the takes I just made today. So, thank you all so much for watching. Remember, go check out that draft guide for the entire SFS master list of sleeper and bust candidates, as well as my top 250 player big board, my positional rankings, draft day cheat sheet, and top 250 player profiles and analysis. So a lot of good stuff in there. Again, it's the best value on the fantasy market this season. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.